Likely Pears is the oral history project of the Palm Springs Library commemorating the 50th anniversary of the city of Palm Springs. And on this occasion, we're in the home of Jane and Boo Hoff in Palm Springs. The date is April 2nd, 1987. And they have very graciously invited us into their home to share with us some of their memories of the good old days. Now, Boo was kind of a latecomer to the desert, as a matter of fact. He, hello. He got here in the 50s, but Jane is one of the real pioneers of Palm Springs. She was born here, grew up here, and her father was the owner of the first general store in Palm Springs, Carl Lykken. So Jane, thank you for letting us join you this morning.
You're welcome.
It's nice to be here. It really is. I think probably the best way to begin would be to ask you something about your earliest memories as a child here in Palm Springs. What are some of the first things you remember when you think about your childhood?
Well, we lived right next to the store in a little two-story greenhouse that my father rented from Cornelia White when he was just about to marry my mother, so that's where I lived at first. And it had some lawn and some pepper trees and a nice front porch on it, and it was fenced along the main street there.
That was right on Palm Canyon, right?
Yes, right. It was just south of 180 North Palm Canyon, where the store is now. And the fence was to keep me in, I guess, or the animals out, because the animals used to roam the town, you know, in the early days, the Indian cattle and wild horses and the donkeys and everything. So anyway, I can remember I used to call across the street to Walter Bunker, lived across there, and Ursula, his wife, and they used to take me here and there, and I'd go over to their house and I'd call across the street to see if I could come and visit, you know. I couldn't go until somebody told me I could.
Well, somebody said it was all right.
And then we moved from there after I almost fell in the cesspool one day. My mother came roaring out, and I was hanging by some Bermuda grass. This hole had come in the ground, you know, and nobody knew that it was going to cave in. Anyway,
your folks decided it was time to move.
Well, not exactly, but we did finally move down to, I guess I must have been, 4 or 5 by the time we moved down on Lime Street, which is now Baristo, right on the corner of Lime and Indian. And we lived down there until 1929, and the Del Tockwitz Hotel had been built. Well, when that started, then my mother and father decided right away to look for another piece of property, because this was a 2-story hotel in our backyard, you see.
They didn't like that.
Couldn't see the mountain or anything. But when we lived down there, we had some interesting neighbors. The minister, Mixel was his name, had quite a family. He had 5 or 6 children, lived across the street from us. And Steve Willard, the artist, lived next door to us. And Lois Kellogg then filled up all the rest of the property in that block. And she was a most interesting person. She raised Russian wolfhound dogs. She had horses over there. The Indians at one time gave her a little black stud, which she kept, and she did ride a little bit. But no matter what, that horse was always there. He was always taken care of. I guess she was very proud of him. And he was a cute little horse. She built she didn't ever finish it, but a concrete house. It was she went from Indian to Palm Canyon Drive. She had the whole end of the block. And on the Indian Avenue side, she built this monstrosity out of solid concrete, and she called it, what did she call it? Well, anyway, it got started another name for it, Fool's Folly, because it was going to be, if it had ever been finished, it would have been a palatial place, a fantastic thing to see, because it had Moorish arches and indoor gardens and everything.
Like a castle.
It would have been a showplace if she'd have ever finished it, but she didn't.
Would she have been related to the Kellogg family of Battle Creek, who were so active in Southern California?
Ambassador Kellogg was, I don't know.
Probably some relationship there.
Yes, but she was a very interesting woman. She had been to Europe, and this is kind of funny. She'd come back sometime from a trip, and the first thing she wanted to do was get into her old shirt and her Levi's and just be a desert person again, and shed all the Paris clothes. And she had a big double strand of pearls, and she'd come into the store and fling them on the counter for my dad to put in the safe for safekeeping. It's kind of interesting.
Tell us something about your folks, Jane. Where did they come from?
Well, my father came from Grafton, North Dakota, and my mother came from Iowa.
Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
How did they happen to both wind up here in Palm Springs?
Well, my father came after an episode in Mexico. He had been down there as a surveyor for an American colony in Mexico, and the revolution came along, and the Cornelia White was also down there, who was another pioneer. And they had to leave Mexico by orders of the president, and eventually, well, the same year they came out of Mexico, they all ended up here. Also Dr. White, who had been here the year before, and she kind of had found Palm Springs by mistake, I guess, to come and enjoy the climate or something.
What were they all doing in Mexico?
They were starting this American farming colony down there, and they had plows and all kinds of things sent down there from the United States, and they were just getting pretty well started, and all of a sudden some of the revolutionaries would come through. They had to hide their money and hide their guns and everything, and they were run out once or twice. I've forgotten now. And the third time they stayed out. They came out by hand car, and it's a funny thing. They had 3 hand cars, 3 or 4.
I thought it was 3.
Yes, they were down at a little town, near a little town called Capaneta, which was below Mazatlan. Very tropical, pretty down there. And
really a beautiful place. I've been there.
Really?
Yeah.
so they
So your dad and Cornelia White and all the rest of these people actually rode railroad handcars back to the United States.
Well, no, just to Mazatlan, because the United States had sent a ship down there to pick them up, pick up all Americans. And so eventually they got into San Diego, and the 2 White sisters came first, and then my father came. It was all in the same year, but later in months. And they all liked it. They stayed at Dr. Murray's hotel, and they just decided to stay.
So your dad went into business.
And that was
Did he have the store right from the first, or did he do something else when he was here?
Well, I really don't know how long it took him to decide, but he came in November of 1913, and he was surveying, I think, for something down here. He never did say very much, you know. If he would just be around now, I could ask him a jillion things. It's awful that we don't do that, you know. But anyway, he bought into this. There was a small store here, so he bought into that, and in due time bought out his partner. It was a matter of a few years, I think. And then by 1917 he met my mother, and they were married.
How had she come to Palm Springs?
She came down to visit some friends for a party.
Oh.
So they met at the same party. My father closed the store in the afternoon while the party was going on, because there wasn't that much business. Everybody in town was at the party.
And he saw her and liked what he saw.
I guess he did.
And they got married.
Yeah.
And did she help him in the store?
Oh yes, always. Well, I guess there were a few years with me involved that she didn't, but after I was started to school, I don't ever remember her being home. You know, she was at the store.
Were you the only child? That came along?
Yeah.
What are your earliest memories of that store, Jane? What do you remember about it?
Well, I don't.
How big was it?
Well, it wasn't very big. There are some good pictures at where the old store is. There are 4, I think, of the first one, and then the developments as it grew. But I don't have it. It wasn't very big. It had a grocery section and some hardware. I can remember the nails were in bins that were just about my size, and the cookies were in boxes that stood on a rack, you know, and you just go along and pull open the door and get the cookies out. I guess I was a good cookie eater. They had to keep me away from those. But that, you know, I was pretty small.
Did you have a lot of dry goods too, clothes?
Eventually. At first there wasn't. I couldn't tell you. But then finally we had dry goods and some. When my mother first got involved, my father had materials in there for mostly the Indian ladies that would make their clothes, you know. And she took one look at those materials and thought, oh my land, we have to do something about that. And my father said, why? The Indians like that kind of stuff, that color and the patterns that he had, you know. And wow, she was horrified. She finally became the buyer well, not for the hardware section, but for all the rest. We had menswear, women's wear, notions, cards, greeting cards, and sewing, shoes, everything. If you couldn't get it at Lykken's, you didn't get it here, you know.
It was an old-fashioned general store.
Yes, it was. And then he had, in 1917, he became postmaster. So that was kind of squashed. Well, the store, I guess, had to grow a little bit. I don't know what the years were when things were expanded, really, but then he had the post office and also the Western Union. He bought the line from Dr. Murray, the only telephone line coming into Palm Springs, and you owned it, and it went over to the station at Garnet. And
he bought that from Dr. Murray.
Dr. Murray, and so then I guess there was an extension from his store over to the Desert Inn for some reason, I don't know. But anyway, he would work as a child. I remember holidays and weekends, Sundays were no different than any other. As a matter of fact, there were more telegrams than ever, you know. But anyway, once in a while this line would wash out, and we'd have to take the telegrams around over to Garnet, up and around. And that was kind of interesting, because the train would come, and they didn't have any telephone from there on into Los Angeles either.
Oh.
The train brought the messages, and they were hooked onto a big long stick with a loop, and the telegrams were all hooked on this loop. And the engine would slow down. Well, they weren't going very fast coming up out of the valley anyway, you know, because it's a grade all the way to Banning.
Yeah.
And the engineer would lean out and just hook his arm through there, and he had another one for the station agent over here.
I see.
And one day I went with them, and I was just a little girl, And they took me, they used to use extra engines, well they do today,
Sure.
to get the loads up the grade from Indio. And there was an extra engine there, so they asked me if I'd like to go for a ride. So I loved that, and a big old steam engine, you know.
Oh, cool.
And I was so small that they had to lift me up, because when we came back into the big Garnet station, which is about 40 by 40, they had to lift me up so I could ring the bell, you know. Ooh, kind of fun, yeah.
So, Garnet really was the only railroad station then?
Yes.
Except for Indio, which I imagine was, they had their switching yard down there.
Yeah, Indio. Yes, I don't know when they built that other station. That it was there for years, but Garnet was the first one, and that's where they picked up everybody that came here in the early days in the buckboard or the old Zaddy Bunker's old truck or whatever they were using at the time.
Well, I heard there was a railroad at one time from Garnet down to Smoke Tree?
There was. It was a colony that was started here back in the 1880s, some late 1880s, I guess, called Palmdale. And they built this little railroad, narrow gauge railroad, and I understand they had 2 little cars and a wood burning engine. The little cars came from San Francisco, and they still had the bells. Maybe they were regular street cars. I mean, cable cars.
I don't know. It served a colony of people who.
But it didn't last long because I don't know. Well, there was the water problem down here. You know, was quite a thing in the early days because the Indians thought the water was theirs, and the white man wanted the water, and there wasn't all that much during the different times of the year, you know. All the canyons dry up except for Chino. Well, Andreas runs most of the time, but there just wasn't enough water, and they lost the rights to the canyon waters, the white man did, which was only fair. The Indians were here first. They had their fields and their animals that they had to worry about, you know, and then all of a sudden all these other people come in this desert, and well, they didn't dig wells or anything for a long time after that, you know.
It's true, all the water came from the creeks in those days,
Yeah.
or the springs.
Well, there was the hot spring, but that wasn't very drinkable.
Still
It
not.
still isn't, no.
Still not.
No.
Where did you start school, Jane?
At the Catherine Finch, what was it called? What's the old school? Francis Stevens, yeah. That's where I started, and we didn't have any kindergarten. You just waited till the first grade and then you went.
I see. And do you remember who your teachers were at all? Remember the names?
Well, Miss Grayhouse was one. She was my first and second grade teacher, I think. And then Miss Newberry was the 5th and 6th. I don't know who I had in the 3rd and 4th, but I remember she whacked me on the back of the legs with a ruler and sent me home one day. But anyway.
You got in trouble?
Well, I was talking, I guess.
Oh.
Anyway, then Miss Finchy taught the 7th and 8th grade when I was there.
So, did you enjoy school? Was it fun?
Well, no, I guess I never really thought too much of school.
That's a big smile right now.
That's the answer I expected. She never thought too much of school, probably more of her horse.
Well, I didn't get really my first horse till I was 13, but I had him in mind all those years.
When did you first start riding?
I had a birthday present of a ride when I was 2.
2?
Mm-hmm.
You don't really remember a lot
No,
about that.
I don't.
But you've always loved horses, haven't you?
Yeah.
And,
Well, you know, there used to be right there, well, where the little white church used to be on the corner, where the little old white church. And there used to be a hitch rack right in the front of that, and a nice big pepper tree. You could tie your horse under that. So people just rode into town in the early days. There was another hitch rack down the road a little bit, and you could tie your horse up and come and buy something at the store, or pick up your mail and go home.
Were there a lot of people who didn't have cars then, who had horses?
Well, I don't know about that, because within my memory, there were cars, you know.
Yeah.
So I think the horses, well, except for workmen that were grading or something, they used teams. But I think most of the people that I knew anyway, everybody had a car.
But there still were hitching racks downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Did your dad have one in front of the store ever that you remember?
Well, it was kind of in front of the store, just down a little ways. There was one.
Now, was the street paved as far back as you can remember?
As I can remember, but it wasn't paved very far.
Yeah.
Just maybe, well, my mother was saying that there was about 2 blocks of pavement, and that was all, you know. So.
Who were some of the other kids you had fun with, if you remember?
Oh dear, you asked me that the other day, and I didn't even think about that. Let me see. Theodore McKinney and Jim Maynard went, and well, there were some kids that were ahead of me, like Jean Fulford and the Bell girls and Mary Helen Stein
Now, Mary Helen Stein, she was the one who later opened the children's clothing store.
Her mother did.
Her mother.
Yeah, I think it was mostly her mother.
Yeah, I see. Called Mary Helen's.
Yeah, after her daughter. And well, let's see, we had Mexican children and Indian children. The Sivas were in school with me. There was Alvino and Paul and Catherine. Catherine is now very much interested and involved in that museum up what do you know, remember? Morongo Reservation.
Yeah.
And
I heard that, or I have heard that there was a special school at one time for the Indian children. Remember that?
no, I don't.
Or a separate school for them?
No, everybody, when I went, everybody went together.
They were all in the same school.
And
Now, what happened when you got old enough to go to high school?
then you rode the bus to Banning. And by the time I went, there had been one bus, and everybody rode the same bus. And by the time I went, there were 2 buses. That year, they split them up, so all the girls had to go in one bus and all the boys in another, which sort of...
They wouldn't let the boys and girls ride together?
No, that was sort of a bummer, I thought. But anyway, it's the way it was. And so he'd take us an hour. We'd stop. We had a couple of stops, one in Cabazon to pick up some other children. And get to school. We'd leave at 7:30 in the morning, wouldn't get back till dark in the wintertime. So our school week was pretty well used up, you know, with the traveling.
I'll bet the kids didn't like going to Banning either.
Well, that was what you did. I don't know. Nobody seemed to complain. We had some fun on the bus, you know. And
were you still in school when they opened the high school here in Palm Springs?
no, that was the year I graduated.
So you never got to go to the local high school?
No, I didn't.
Do you remember any special friends you had when you were growing up? Any special girlfriends?
Well, I had one friend that I still have. Her name is Deborah Abbott, and we were friends in the 1st grade.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Jean Evans she lives in Arizona now, but we are still very good friends. And well, let's see, Mary Rose Case, Stone, her name is now, was here when we were in the early years of our schooling, but then she moved away, but I still see her. So she starts back in the 1st grade too, and we were standing there with our little bloomers, you know, funny looking little kids.
Bloomers?
Yeah, they bloomers came down below the little dress.
Oh.
It's kind of funny. I don't know why, don't ask me why.
So Somebody thought they were cute.
I guess so.
But you still associate with some of those people, and you're still friends. I think that's
Oh, yeah.
wonderful.
And Theodore, Jim Maynard is dead, and Theodore is still here.
Jim Maynard was part of the scene then, too.
Yeah.
He did a lot of writing, didn't he?
Well, I don't remember
But
him.
he had a mine.
Yes, he had a mine, and he had the darndest thing. I wish we'd have saved it. It was he had a donkey, and to get his supplies and everything up there, he would hitch this donkey, and it was the craziest looking thing you ever saw. It was a thing to hold things, and it was on a kind of a bicycle wheel. It had two handles, so the donkey went up the trail, and this thing had a iron piece that went up and fastened on the top of the harness on the donkey. So when the donkey went around a switchback in the trail, which is a sharp, sharp turn, this thing that was hooked up here, you see, was swiveling, so Jimmy could be still going this way and going around the corner, and the donkey was going this way, you see. And it's the only way he could have gotten those things up there, and it's amazing what he took up there with that thing.
When did he start the mine? Do you remember?
No, when he was, I suppose I really haven't any idea. But a young man, a young man.
Did you ever find anything in the mine?
Yeah, tungsten.
It was tungsten, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it was ever sufficient tungsten to make any money on it.
No.
Somebody here sponsored him, didn't he?
Oh, I guess.
Grub steak team?
I guess so. But Jim was a walker, you know. He tramped these mountains on foot.
Powerful man, very, very strong.
He was big.
Big.
Yeah. But he rode horses, I guess. Sure, once in a while. He never really rode for pleasure like I did, you know. Or
Was your dad a really enthusiastic horseback rider?
he liked to ride when he had the time. He was pretty busy with the store and all the civic activities and whatnot that he had, you know.
He got involved in almost everything that went on, I guess.
Just about.
Remember when the city incorporated, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of that now. How did he feel about that? Did he ever talk about it at home, or do you remember?
Well, I don't remember, but I would guess that we would have been for it, because it was certainly would curb some things and add others as far as how the building was going and the things that people should or shouldn't be doing, you know, because this town had kind of just grown like Topsy. So it was good to have restraints. I would think he would think so.
He must have had an interesting circle of friends, too.
Everybody in town.
That he kept busy with.
Yeah.
Well, people like Phil Boyd.
Yes.
Who, of course, was so active in town. He came knocking the Kaufmans.
And the Robersons and the Cokers and the Steins and the Willards and of course the McManuses were here, and there were.
He also had a pretty good relationship with all the Mexicans and Indians, didn't he?
Oh yeah, because they did business, you know. They bought their groceries, and that was the only place to buy anything.
And he had a good relationship with all of them.
Oh yes. Oh well, he was that kind of a man. He was get along with anybody. Very quiet, very quiet and very kind person.
Tell us something about the Robersons. I hear that name so frequently. What did they do in town, or what did he do?
Well, he was Nellie Kaufman's son. He and George were both Nellie Kaufman's sons.
I see.
And he was the Earl Kaufman ran the inside business in the hotel, and George was the mechanical-minded one, I guess, and he took care of all the grounds and the machinery and the things like that. That's kind of interesting, you're talking about when you were a kid. We didn't have any swimming pools, golf courses, or anything like that in those days, you know. There was, if we were invited, Mrs. Kaufman used to give an Easter party every year for all the children in town when we were very small. And everybody would get dressed up in their Easter best, you know, to go for the Easter egg hunt and the breakfast. But they had I think they had 2 tennis courts, and they had a great big pool for the Desert Inn guests eventually. But I don't think there was another pool in town for a while, you know. And that pool looked like it might have been too. You'll have to ask Betty Kiley about this, or Ruth Roberson, if it was used for irrigation. It could have been, but oh no, it had chlorine and ice. Oh, anyway. But it was a big body of water, you know.
In those days.
And I was just wondering if possibly it was going to be used for other things too. I don't know. But the irrigation did come in here, you know, from Whitewater, and that whole Desert Inn grounds were flooded. Yeah. But anyway, getting back to recreation when you're small. Of course, I was dying to have a pair of skates like other children. Some of the out-of-town children, you know, had bicycles and skates and everything. Well, I finally got the skates, the old kind with a key that you have to screw on and wrecks your shoes, you know. And so I'd start out, but you didn't go very far. Well, first I had to learn to skate. That wasn't so easy, especially when the big cracks in the sidewalk and the sand is on the cement, you know. And then there'd be a space of dirt and then maybe a little more sidewalk up here. Or the street wasn't all that good either. And the bicycles, if they didn't have balloon tires, so to speak, you know. So I had a tricycle when I was small, but you just kind of rode that around in the yard where the ground was hard. You know, you really couldn't go anywhere in the sand.
Sounds like a bumpy ride on a bicycle.
Well, I don't remember very many bicycles. I don't know what. Well, after you grow out of your tricycle, how old are you when you get a bicycle? I don't know.
True. Do you remember your folks ever giving you any stern warnings about the desert critters and being careful? Snakes and things like that?
No, I suppose they did.
Did any ever come visiting in the store that you remember?
No, well, I'm sure they found cockroaches and scorpions and who knows, probably they did, but that was a fact of life, you know, I mean.
You just didn't worry much about them?
No.
You never had any problems with them? When you started riding, Jane, were there a lot of really enthusiastic horseback riders here in those days?
Oh, sure. Well, even in the early days, people would come when the Desert Inn. See, she came in 1905, and I think she started her inn in 1907 or something like that. Anyway. What? 9. Okay. But people would bring their own horses down here even, although there were stables here. And they would you could ride in any direction, up in the canyons, through the sand, any old place you wanted to go, for hours if you wanted.
Were there any clubs or organizations of riders in those early days?
Not till Desert Riders formed in 1930. And then they had members like the Robersons and the Kaufmans and Dr. White and Marion Fulford, all those people that had been they'd go out riding early in the morning, you know, and they decided they might as well get together and make this a fun thing. So they started with breakfast rides, which the club is still in existence today, just as much as ever.
They're the oldest club in Palm Springs, aren't they?
That's right, and we have been the sole organization to maintain the trails, build new ones, or anything in this area. Through the reservation, the city now helps us financially for some that are in the city.
Well, when did Los Compadres get started?
They got started in 39.
And it was just another riding club. I'll bet a lot of people belonged to both of them.
Well, they were different types of people. The Desert Riders were I don't know how to put this. They
A little more affluent?
yes, the Los Compadres were just working people, and they would get together and they built a chuck wagon, and there's a good difference. The Desert Riders always had a caterer to cook the food. The Los Compadres built their own chuck wagon, did their own cooking, and it was fun. To go to the moonlight rides and campfire and broiling steaks, and we really had a good time. And all the horses and everything, and people going. And the Desert Riders had the moonlight rides and the breakfast rides, lunches too, depending on the time of the year. And I don't mean to sound, it'll never happen again, but I'm the only woman that's ever been president of both clubs. I think after they had me, they decided, forget it.
Did you enjoy it?
Very much, yeah.
She was a good president of both of them. You bet.
Well, that, of course, would not have been in those early days.
No.
But the riding then was a lot of fun, and that sounds like really probably the most activity, the biggest activity before the big hotels began to open. Do you remember when El Mirador opened?
In 1929 or thereabouts.
1929, when P.T. Stevens opened it.
Now they had a pretty big pool with a big diving board, and but the first golf course was Tom O'Donnell's, and it was his own golf course. He made it over and bought, I guess, the property from Mrs. Kaufman, where she used to have a big pasture, and he put in a little 9-hole golf course. It's still there,
Yeah.
for his own use and his guests.
And then he eventually gave that he leased it to the city, I guess, for a 99-year lease. And then the city, I think, acquires it at the end of 99 years.
I really don't know.
Something of that sort. But anyway.
There was a controversy about doing away with it. I know that caused a big furor for a while, but I don't think they ought to. It's kind of a nice little green spot next to the mountain there.
There's much land like that left anymore.
No.
Did you ever play golf? Were you a golfer at all?
I took lessons for a year.
Who's laughing?
Well, but the golfing and the horses are both time consuming. It doesn't work. You can't pay attention like you should to either one if you're trying to do both.
Well, you got your first horse when you were 12, you said.
Well, 13,
12,
I think.
13.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you keep your horses in those days? Where were they stabled?
There were 3 stables out on Los Caballeros, right opposite the middle of town. About 1 block north, I guess, of McCallum. Way out in the middle of nowhere, really.
Well, it would have been.
Yeah. And
Had Frank Bogart arrived in town by then? Do you remember?
well, I don't know, when did he come?
What are your earliest memories of Frank? He came as a cowboy, didn't he?
Well, I guess he did. I don't know. When we used to have gymkhanas and things, he would announce. That's kind of the first time I can remember him well, I don't know. What would you want to know?
I don't know. I just wondered if there was anything you remembered that you wanted to say about him.
Are you gonna? Back to my father,
Yeah,
right?
I'll just turn it back to your dad.
He came in 13, as I said, and then in 1915 he became postmaster and served under 3 presidents. It was Wilson, Harding, and Coolidge, and he served until 1930, which was 15 years. And he was a merchant for 30 years, and he was the Western Union representative for approximately 12 or 13 years. He was probably the first notary public because he started in 1914 until 1917. He was on the school board starting in 1915, community church elder starting in 1917. For 40 years he did that. And he was clerk of the session for 35 years. And was a past president of the first police commission, the fire and sanitary commission, the Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce, the Community Chest, the Desert Museum, and the Riverside County Council of Boy Scouts, the Desert Riders, and he was the chairman of the Palm Springs Historical Society in 1957, and he was president of the little polo club that's still going. I don't know whether you know anything about that. It's just a little social club.
Oh.
And he was a member of the library board and the cemetery board and on the regional advisory board for the Bank of America. And let's see, that's about enough.
He sounds like someone who didn't know how to say no.
Yeah, he was president of the field club in 1945.
Tell us about that little polo club you mentioned, Jane. I have heard it said that that is actually the oldest social organization in the desert. Did that go back before Desert Riders?
No, The field club was already there, and this group, it was again the Robersons, Kaufmans, and they decided that they did have some polo ponies here. Pat Patterson, who owned the drugstore, liked to play polo, and I don't know who all had them. Anyway, I was kind of busy going to school at that time, but they decided, I suppose the women didn't play polo, you know, and why not have a little party after some of these games? So they built a little building over there on the polo grounds, and they had their little evening parties. Jack Boyer catered for them for years and years, and then Johnny Boyle. And it's been kind of an old-timers group over the years. Now we're into the third generation, member-wise.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that's how the old Polo Grounds got its name, where the library is now, and the Angel Stadium and so on. They used to call it the Polo Grounds.
Yeah.
And that would,
The field club.
The field club. Well, that was a central location for people who had horses in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah, but they had a track and a big infield and a nice grandstand there. And then they had rows of barns, but the horses, the Palm Springs horses, never, well, I guess the few of them were stabled there, but it really was never a rental stable. That was for horse shows or something that would come, you know.
Why don't you tell them about the Polo Club now?
What about it?
Well, that we still meet for about for dinner and have a little social activity the first Sunday of each month for about 8 months. And it's still active, but is completely a social club.
But it's still going on, and
Yeah,
it's still
and-
with the same people?
Yeah. Yes.
Well,
yeah.
a lot of them are gone. Yeah.
But a few of the original members are still members of it.
Let me see. I don't think
That's
there's
pretty long ago.
I don't think there's an original member left.
No.
It's made up of people, however, who are what they call old timers, you know, here 20, 30, 40 years. There are no newcomers in the club at all.
That's true. Jane, you have a lot of pictures. I'm looking at one of your dad right now that I know we want to show our viewers out there. Let me hold this one up while you grab another one of those books. This is Carl Lykken, and you said, Boo, I think that this was taken probably in the 50s.
Yeah, I think I think it was previous to that, about around 46 or 47, the late 40s, I guess.
He's a good-looking guy.
Yeah, great picture, I think.
He looks like a real cowboy.
Yeah, and he was.
Well, anyway, he just enjoyed riding. You know, he wasn't a
Let me
cowboy,
hold these up. And you
so
tell
to
us what we're
speak.
looking at here.
Well, let's see.
Kind of scooch around a little bit.
This was the 30th anniversary of the Desert Riders, and this is Frank Bogert and Johnny Boyle, Ray Cree, who came in the early days.
Now, Raymond Cree was a teacher, wasn't he? Or
Yes, he was the superintendent of schools, I
superintendent
think.
of schools.
And he's the one that, he had 40 acres out here by Rim Rocks, you know, but he had some other deep well property. I don't know. Anyway, and Dr. Reed, one of our first doctors, not our first, but one of the early ones.
Yeah.
And there is Frank Bogert again, and Mrs. McManus. She was getting along in years by this time, but she was a good sport and went on this ride for this anniversary party. There's Tony Burke. And this
Tony
is,
Burke publicized the town, didn't he?
yeah, quite a bit, yeah.
He was a good publicist.
And this is Mary Harrell, and that is a Palm Springs hat, so they used to call them. And for the Desert Circus, they'd have this big party, you remember that, at the hat parade and everything. Well, it started out with one of those little straw hats like that. And here's some people arriving in the wagon. The horses are here, you can't hardly tell. But for this party, and I think my father and mother were up on there somewhere, because they were not riding anymore. That's the famous Ray Ryan. This is Cordray, Earl Cordray, and these I can't remember who
Doesn't
they
matter.
are. Let's see. Well, here's another nice one of Frank and Pat Laughlin. Her husband was the president of the Desert Riders this year. This is the 30th anniversary.
That's Frank Bogert a few years ago.
Yeah. There's Marion Matthews. She came here in the early 20s, about 1922, I guess. No. Well, yes, she did, I think.
So she was one of the real pioneers.
Mm-hmm. And this is, we used to have celebrities once in a while. That's the man that made the donkey song famous.
Oh, Alan Young.
Alan Young, yeah.
Well, whatever, yeah. And Mrs. McManus, and that's Lloyd Laughlin again. But I don't know what is interesting to you.
They're all interesting.
Well,
Let's see, who's that with Addie Pearl there?
that's Lloyd Laughlin
That's
again.
Lloyd Laughlin again. 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And see, the caterer would set up the tables and bring the chairs.
Smoke Tree.
Yeah. And so we had nice comforts on our rides. Once you got there, there's the chuck wagon in the background. Look at the size of the coffee pot.
That's a coffee pot?
Yeah. And this is just out beyond, well, there's the Los Compadre Clubhouse. This is just a little east of that. And now you can imagine what's out there now, you know, and look,
Who's
just
the
not.
fellow with the cigar there? Do you remember?
That's Earl Henderson.
That's Earl Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
For goodness sake.
And Claire Woodmansee and Cliff Campbell. And I can't tell who that is at the end there.
You've got some marvelous pictures.
Let's see. Nobody much in there, I guess, old timers. There's Jones, Alan Jones.
Alan Jones.
That's what his name is.
That's right, you're right.
Yeah, and Tony Burke, right there is Alan Jones. He used to sing for us once in a while. We could con him into singing the donkey song.
I want to go to your big book over there, Gene, because I know you've got some really super pictures in that one. And this is going to take a little handling because it's sort of heavy, but it's worth it. I'll sort of hold it up and you can tell what we're looking at.
Okay.
Now this is from the Desert Sun, Friday, November 27th, 1931.
Yeah.
First
Yes.
breakfast ride of the new club makes a big hit.
It's kind of interesting to read that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is anybody taking pictures?
Well, I don't know, but these are some early ones. No, I'm sorry these are this way, but they are.
All right.
See, they started cooking on the ground.
There we go.
See, the fire is over here. There's Errol McKinney. She used to ride all the time. And here's Dr. Hoagland. He was an early, probably a charter member.
Now we have to hold it real still, and we can get in close enough on those to.
And this is Dr. Hoagland again. And here is Dr. White, one of the few pictures of her.
Cornelia White.
No, Dr.
Oh, Dr. White.
Florella, yeah.
Florella.
And Tony Burke, and here's Earl Strebe, looks like, way back here.
Can you get in close on that one? At all? Who are the ladies on horseback over here?
Okay. Do you want me to say any more about the other people?
Who are the other people in the picture there?
Well, this is Tony Burke and Hoagland, Dr. Hoagland again, and Earl Strebe back here. Now, I don't know who that is, but he's quite dressed up. He probably doesn't belong to this town. But you can...
Who are the fellas in this picture and the lady?
Well, this is Chuck Morrison, and this was his wife. And here's Dr. Hoagland again, and Tony Burke. They lived here for quite a number of years.
Okay.
And boy, he had a silver-mounted saddle and a big horse. See, it used to be fun. They'd bring people in the stagecoach.
Now that stagecoach really was a working stagecoach?
Oh, sure. Trav Rogers had that. There's four horses, you see. And here they are at their destination.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That was a lot more fun than the hay wagons and things. Here's there's Robert Taylor right there, and Earl Kaufman, and Hoagland again, and Tony Burke.
Tony Burke got a lot of pictures.
Yeah, well, he was busy.
Well, here's another one. I don't think we get close enough to really see that, but there's another picture of Florella White and Tony Burke and Rose Dugan.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Boyle, who you said catered a lot of...
Well, he entertained for many years, and then after Jack Boyer stopped catering, Johnny started. Well, it was kind of an overlap in there, but...
And here's one of the best pictures I've ever seen of Melba Bennett.
What's she eating? No telling.
No telling, but she's enjoying it.
Yeah. And here, see, they were cooking over the fire, but they didn't...
Now, who's this fellow here? Ted Slocum Trails boss.
Well, now, he was one of the first trails bosses we had. And see how they used to ride with the silver, and he's got no, he doesn't. I thought that was tapaderos for a minute, but the tall boots. He was an early resident. Let's see, I think, did he live at Smoke Tree? Well, I don't know. I don't remember very much about him.
Okay, well, let's go to your next page.
Here's Frank when he was young. And Chuck Morrison again, and Slocum again.
This is kind of interesting. What's that? That's sort of your bylaws or something of the Desert
Found in
Riders?
19 annual. Well, it's not the bylaws.
This
I
was
don't
founded in
think.
1930 and talks about your annual election and dues of $10.
Yeah. I don't know what it is.
Talks about what members can and can't do.
Well, maybe that's all they had. They just wrote out something like
probably
that.
was. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised.
Yeah.
There's a nice picture of Frank Bogart.
Mm-hmm. That was 1937.
It really is.
And there's Charlie Farrell in that one.
English comedian, guest of Charlie Farrell. There's Charlie sitting in the center. And again, Tony Burke over on the side. What a nice picture of Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
The Racket Club hadn't even been started then, had it? Around these go back to around 1930.
well, I don't suppose this is 1930 because he wasn't around much till he came down here and started the club. But she wants it leaning a little bit
Forward.
I don't know. This is after, a lot of these are after 1930. Yeah. This poor old book is falling apart.
Those are just activities.
Just cooking, yeah. But they just used to ride out in the desert
The little
almost.
sign says how our chow was prepared in the 1930s.
Yeah. And that's the way it was. They never, the desert riders have never really owned anything. The Los Compadres had a chuck wagon and a clubhouse. They still do. But the desert riders just...
Here's something that talks about your 1941-42 season.
Well, these are letters. These are all, because we get a monthly letter. And they're kind of fun to read. It tells you what happened, who fell off, and things like that. Oh, sure.
The desert rider would ever admit that?
Oh, every once in a while. I don't know what all that is. Oh, we put on, sponsored an Arabian show here one time. And it did quite well. I wish we could do more things like that. Because really, and here we are on, this is Jack Boyer's outfit. And this is right up across from the Canyon Country Club Hotel.
Now,
This is the Villager, you see.
The Villager is the magazine that preceded Palm Springs Life magazine. And it ended publication when Milt Jones bought the rights to the old Villager, and it became Palm Springs Life. But this was the magazine that preceded that. And it was very colorful.
And so you can see some of the horses, the rest of them are all over here. But this was a 25th anniversary, you see. And so the celebration that time, Melba brought a huge wash tub full of carrots so the horses could celebrate with us.
That was very thoughtful.
And there she is. That's a good picture of her.
That's one of the nicest pictures I've seen.
It's a nice one. Boy, this poor old book. There's another anniversary, or maybe it's the same one.
It's really a history of the desert riders, isn't
Yeah, well, this is their book. These are newspaper clippings. Here's Jack Boyer years ago. He used to sing, too, when you could talk him into
See
it.
that one, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, we can hear.
Stuff to see.
Find some better ones. Here he is. He would sing with Johnny lots of times. And here we are on the, see the horses around this. And Canyon Country Club wasn't there. There's my father and my mother.
Beautiful picture of the
and the
stage.
Hicks, Harold Hicks.
That's Harold Hicks. That's your dad. That's your mother. Who's that leaning out there? Do you know?
No, I don't. Here's Marion Matthews back here.
And who's the fellow on the
Oh, maybe that was her second husband. I'll bet it was. That's Melba.
And that's Melba Bennett down on the ground.
That's who that is.
That's a
Charlie
great-
Matthews.
That's a great picture.
Yeah.
It really is. And those are just outdoor scenes.
Well, this was that same party, I imagine.
Parties.
Oh, sir.
You knew how to give good parties.
Let's see if I can find you some better, not pictures. This was up in the canyon. Or was it? No. Yeah, it has to be.
There's a picture of Ed McCoubrey a long time ago.
He's a past president of the Desert Riders.
A very enthusiastic rider himself, I know.
Yeah, he rides every day still. Well, there's a lot of things in here. Here's another time our members were on the front page of the magazine, Palm Springs Live.
That would have been a few years later.
And we even made one in France. This is Claire Woodmansey. She was Dr. Woodmansee was a doctor here for years and years, and she was our buck boss. Is what you call a treasurer in the Desert Riders. And I don't know if this where these people came from, but anyway, they sent her, and we were on the front page. And look at Johnny, isn't that a good one, of Johnny Boyle?
Oh, yes.
See, they did this all in French.
That's Tony Cosentino
Where?
on the front here. Right up there.
Oh, it's his?
Well, maybe it's not. The story says it is.
Well, then it is. I haven't read this stuff for a long time.
There's commemorating your first term or your term as the first woman president of Los Compadres.
Yeah.
And an article where you talk about the good old days.
Oh my, maybe I should have read that first, huh? It was kind of hard to, well, I don't know. What else? These are all kind of, you know, the same thing, just horses and people and what? 40th year. There's another one of my dad.
That's you and your dad.
Yeah. That's, this was the 40th anniversary, I guess, when I
That would have
was.
been around 1960.
And my dad was a past president, and Boo was a past president. And then this was, I don't know, we went on well, let's see, do you want to see any more of these?
Oh, I think we're getting up to modern times.
Yeah, we are.
We've seen the good
We
ones,
are.
the old ones.
Yeah.
Those pictures are really beautiful, and I thank you for sharing them
you.
with us. It brings back a lot of memories, and I'm sure a lot of their friends will recognize them. They will. Boo, you came down here when now, in the 50s, the early 50s?
Well, I guess it was about 32 years ago, 33.
How did you get acquainted with Jane?
We met up in Idlewild at a bar.
At a bar.
The owner of the bar, Carol Vogelaar, who used to be in the police force here, yeah. And I had known him, and I was up there at a meeting for General Electric Company. Some of the principals of General Electric Company from Southern California were having a 3-day meeting up there, and I walked in to see Carol, and he introduced me to Jane, and here we are 30-some years later.
Now, you got involved in the Desert Riders right away. Had you always liked riding horseback?
Yes, yeah, I've ridden for years back in the East, but in fact, when I went to college, I joined the cavalry unit in order to ride. Couldn't afford to ride, you know, and so I joined the cavalry unit down in Florida. Yeah, 104th Cavalry. It was a Pennsylvania National Guard cavalry. We were mounted, and that was that was back in about I had 4 years in there, starting about 1930. Yeah.
So what did your dad think of this fellow when you introduced him, Jane?
Well, he really didn't say very much.
Was he sort of a strict parent most of your life?
No, my mother was the disciplinarian.
She was the strict one. It's very often that way. Dad's the one who says, go and enjoy yourself and have a good time.
Yeah.
But when did you actually move here to the desert?
Let's see, after we were married, we moved to Los Angeles for a short time, then up to Hot Point Company moved me up to San Francisco. And when did we come down here?
About 60, wasn't it?
Yeah, about previous to 1960, about 1958.
And you keep a home in Sedona, New Mexico too, don't you? Or Arizona?
Arizona.
Little one.
Is it anything like Palm Springs?
No, not at all. The country is completely different. Anybody that's ever seen the Arizona highway certainly has seen pictures that's photographed more than any place I can think of, that in the Grand Canyon, you know.
Is it desert though?
It's a high desert type of place.
There are piñons, piñon pines, and then as you go up the canyon, it's a beautiful canyon there, Oak Creek is. the vegetation, and you can, in 26 miles, you get up to 7,000 feet, so you can imagine how it changes.
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, you did an interview with Frank Bogert and I once 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
Where you talked about the work of the Desert Riders keeping up the trails around the mountains. How did the riders actually organize those trails to begin with? Did they create the trails, or were they already there?
Well, some of them were there. Some of them were old Indian trails, but a lot of them were places that someone had ridden before, but not a trail, just picking our way, you know. Like the one that's named after Art Smith, our present trails boss, which goes from down in Route 74 right over the mountain to down here at Smoke Tree and on down to Los Compadres. And that's a ride that I used to enjoy. Somebody said there was an old trail back there someplace, and I never did find the trail, I don't think, but I found the beginning of it, and then just picked my way across the mountain and thought that Art needed a trail, and because of the work he had done, and he's done a lot of work for the Desert Riders and Trails, and so we built that trail at a cost of, this had been 15, 20 years ago, of about $12,000 to $14,000 by donations from the Desert Riders, and that's a really they're practically all new trails that have been built and maintained by the Desert Riders.
Is there a map?
Yeah.
Do they publish a map?
Yeah, we publish. Yeah, and there are a lot of them sold. You can get them up at the, you can get them down to Historical Society, or you can get them.
Our library has one.
Yeah.
Museum.
And I think they cost $1, but and they're very helpful. A lot of people buy them and get out and look for the trailhead, and they enjoy the ride. In fact, the trails are used much more, I think, by the hikers than they are the horse people.
Especially the Lykken Trail,
Yeah.
which was named after my father, that runs the whole length of the city. It's beautiful. You can get on it in 3 places.
That's an easy trail to walk, isn't it?
Well, you're climbing though too, you know.
Well, it's
But
easy
you
to
don't-
find,
I mean,
and there
you
are
don't
parking
have a lot of
places.
rock climbing or anything.
No. It's a maintained trail. The horses use it.
And it gets up pretty high.
Yeah.
It is a nice one. Is there anything either of you would like to add to what we've talked about this morning? Do we overlook anything anywhere along the way, you think?
Well, I think it's Jane, because of her activities here, has not only been honored by, with horses, has not only been honored by the presidency of the Desert Riders and the Los Compadres, but they have a place where we go over here in Eagle Canyon. There's a trail down to it, and that's called the Hoff Brow, and it's spelled Hoff instead of Hofbrau, and that's named after Jane for the things that you've done. A lot of hikers go in there, and a lot of Desert Riders and other riders go in there too.
Well, I want to thank you both for sharing your home with us this morning, and so much of your time and so many of your memories. It's been a really interesting morning for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Happy to do it with you.